Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with the very first, yesterday was the very first post-ban on MTGO for Modern. And I just want to talk about it really quick and then we'll queue up I'll show you a Soul Sisters deck tech and why I actually think that Soul Sisters is very well positioned in the metagame once again because it's going to be a rock, paper, scissors format. I think actually the banning of Twin is going to be pretty bad for the diversity of Modern. Actually, Bloom and Twin kept the metagame quite diverse with two boogeyman decks that basically were rough for some of these combo based decks to really fire on all cylinders. And then because Amulet Bloom could really race anything, and so it gave a lot of losses to decks like Tron or decks that were the heavy control based decks. And then Splinter Twin was really good against any sort of mid range. Splinter Twin was just an all out very solid deck that punished both creature-based aggro strategies, I would say, as well as really all-out combo decks because of cards like Remand are just miserable for combo decks, especially Grixis Twin with the ability to Thoughtseize. And then, and it kept down Tron to a point, and so everyone thought that after the Bloom and Tron or Bloom and Splinter Twin were banned, they really thought that it would just be Tron. And to a point, they might be right. Like, I've seen so much Tron, and for some reason, I would keep matching up against a ton of Living End decks, which Living End isn't terrible for Soul Sisters, especially if I go back to the Martyr build. The Martyr build is actually very good versus the Living End, because what you can do is you can actually sacrifice a Martyr, and then you have a Martyr in the graveyard so that if they try to go off with Living End. And also, Soul Sisters makes them use a Living End very, very quickly, and then you have a lot of ways to recover through like Spectral Processions and All of the Pures and whatnot. So I'll show you that list in a second, but this is exactly what I thought would happen. So everyone went to RG-Tron, and now the decks that are good versus RG-Tron, I mean, this is just a small sample size, but it's showing that Affinity, Scapeshift, and Affinity were the 5-0 decks in the first post-ban Modern League event. So why Affinity had a rough matchup versus Twin? You could easily beat Twin with Affinity, but Affinity had cards like Electrolyze and even Remand to a point, Lightning Bolt, Snapcaster Lightning Bolts were all very, very good against Affinity. So it was one of the decks that was keeping Affinity a little bit at bay. It was a fairly fair match, though. I mean, Affinity versus Twin was a fun little matchup because of Galvanic Blast kind of being really good against the Twin combo. And just the hyper aggression Affinity can run out can put Twin on its heels and make Twin not sit back and play like a heavy, slow control game. They have to try to go for the combo. They have to try to shut down Affinity. So I actually like that kind of matchup. So Affinity just wrecks Tron. Even with Pyroclasm and Fire Spouts, Affinity is incredibly good against Tron just because it can hook up a Cranioplating to an Inkmoth Nexus or a Blinkmoth Nexus or an Etch Champion, and Tron has very little they can do against it. Karn is quite weak because of only being able to exile one permanent, and Ugin is incredibly terrible versus Affinity because it really doesn't do anything. So Affinity is one of the most lopsided matchups versus Tron. They do bring in cards like the Ancient or Nature's Claim and Pyroclasm and Fire Spout, but again, I don't think it's enough to really combat Affinity. Now, Scapeshift is just incredibly easy versus Tron because Tron cannot kill Scapeshift before Scapeshift kills Tron. What are you going to do? A Wormcoil Engine? Not going to do it. You're going to play an Ugin? Not going to do it. You're going to play even an Ulamog can't quite be the turn 3 Tron. So turn 4 Tron, I guess you can get an Ulamog out, but I don't know if it's going to do quite enough. And they still do have cards in Scapeshift. Let's pull up the Scapeshift list that this person is running. And they do have lots of ways to ramp through Secure Tri-Builder and Search for Tomorrow, and they do have like the Cryptic Commands. This one's a Bring Delight Scapeshift deck, and it's just miserable for Tron to try to beat this particular Scapeshift build. So the Martyr list with Soul Sisters is actually pretty decent versus Scapeshift. In fact, I can put in some more Scapeshift hate versus this sort of build. Like what I can do is you can put in the anti-search cards, like the Aven Mind Sensor or Leonin. The Leonin got that makes him pay 2. But even cards that just gain a ton of life, like this version is going to be what we call a 5-color Tron, or 5-color Scapeshift, or 4-color Scapeshift here, with the Painful Truths. So they are running, let's see, we have 4, 8, 9, 10. All they are running is 10 mountains. And so with a well-timed, and only 2 Valakids. So with a well-timed Martyr, or just gaining life with the Martyr and Serra's Ascendant, you can actually get above the amount of damage that this Scapeshift deck can do. 2 Lightning Bolts, 2 Electrolyzes, not going to do it. So you just get that early. I guess they have this Hunting Wilds that they can make 3/3 green creatures with haste. All forest, but if they use that, yeah, I guess that's another win condition in this one. But if you get in that early Martyr for sack and you get up to, I believe you need to get up to 38 life. I'll have to do the math again. You can be out of range for Scapeshift. And then I've brought in cards in the past like Pay No Heed that I think do very well versus Scapeshift. And Pay No Heed actually does very well versus Infect, as well as it does very well versus Affinity for that one turn when they try to do that one turn kill. And Pay No Heed actually does very well versus Grishel Shoal. So Pay No Heed is definitely a card that we can put back in and maybe take out the Celestial Flares, which I'm running right now. But also Celestial Flares does very good against Affinity, or not Affinity, Boggles, Infect, and Grishel Shoal. It does very well against all 3 of those. So I'm not quite sure I really want to mess with the Pay No Heed's replacing Celestial Flares. So Affinity, the way that Squadron Hawk build versus Affinity is incredibly good because you clog up the board. I have 4 Spectral Processions and the 4 Squadron Hawks, and they do a very good job clogging up the board. They also, any sort of Soul Sister is kind of miserable for Affinity because they get you above that 30 life quite easily when they dump their hand. And then your Serra's Ascendants can be very hard. They have nothing that can actually kill the Serra's Ascendants. The Galvanic Blasts are out of range. And it's Affinity. I've played the Affinity matchup a lot. And plus, this allows us now that Tron and Affinity are back being big, it allows us to run the Stony Silence in either a 3 of or a 4 of that it does very well against that. So anyway, let's just go ahead and look at the current Soul Sisters build I have. So I'm still running the Ghost Quarters because I think they're good versus Tron. We're still most likely dead to Tron, but we do have the 3 of Stony Silences. And Tron is, with this current build, you can still win with like Spectral Processions, Evasive, Spectral Procession with On the Pures. It's not a great matchup, but it's not a terrible, well, it is a terrible matchup with Tron. Blue Tron's much worse. There's a lot of decks that are worse, in my opinion. Like Bloom was worse than Tron. And now with Bloom out of the format and not making us focus so much on hating out Twin, I think that the Tron matchup gets slightly better. So I would say it's around 25% to 30% win rate versus Tron. We do have the Ghost Quarters that can slow him down. And again, we can go in more of a hate style versus Tron. But it's still going to be a bad matchup. But for Affinity and Scapeshift, I really like this particular list. So it's going to be 3 Martyrs. This is also going to make the win rate from Burn to go back from, like, I would say it was like an 80% when I had the 0 Martyr build to now like a 95%. Like the 3 Martyrs is really going to be hard for Burn to beat. And the 2 of Path to Exiles that are switched over, 2 in mainboard, 2 of sideboard. I have 2 Auriok Champions now on the sideboard because Auriok Champion gets a lot worse with Twin out of the metagame. So it's just 2 of in the mainboard. We have the 7 Soul Sisters still in the main board. I still like the 4 Honor the Pures, but to be honest, I think the Honor the Pure might be on the chopping block for like an Aven Mind Sensor or a Leonin. Where is he? Leonin Arbiter. So Leonin Arbiters makes it so players can't search libraries. It's got pretty good synergy with the Ghost Quarter. It also has good synergy with Path to Exile. And I don't know where, if we even need past main board, where the cuts need to occur. Again, with the Celestial Flare versus Pay No Heed, still an option. Still like the Mark of Asylum in the sideboard because it turns all of your Soul Sisters basically into Auriok Champions. And 4 Rangers are still going to be this is one of the best cards in the deck. And of course the Ajani's Pridemate. This is basically the meat and potatoes of the deck. And I still like the one of Secure the Waste just as an instant speed card that you can take over games. I have an Archangel of Thune and 2 Return the Ranks still in the sideboard. We'll have to wait and see if those are good. Return the Ranks is actually really good versus the Living End, unless Living End brings in the Leyline. But if they bring in Leyline, it's not that big of a deal. Now, we are missing Sundering Gross now, I might bring them back in if we need them. Sun Growths are okay versus Tron. They're okay versus Affinity. They're okay versus Bogles. They're okay versus a few matchups. That's why Sun Growth was just this okay card, and that's why I put it in the sideboard. Is it wasn't any deck that used an enchantment or artifact, it's fine. Where it really shined is versus decks that try to use cards like Humility or Ghostly Prison, but we don't really see those decks that often anymore. And Ghostly Prison decks are going to really go away now without Twin. So I think that we're going to see a lot of hyper-aggressive Zoo. We're going to see a lot of Kiki Cord. We're going to see a lot of Affinity and Tron, but Tron I think is going to get weeded out, and we're going to see a decent amount of Scapeshift as time moves on. And I even think that Delver just won the last Star City Open, so we might even see some Delver tempos. So I think that it's a plus, an overall plus with Twin and Bloom out of the way. The metagame gets a lot less diverse as far as combo decks are concerned. Well, hyper aggressive combo decks are going to get... And then the very, very, very control decks, which Soul Sisters is terrible against, I believe are going to be non-existent, because they do terrible versus Tron, and they do terrible versus hyper-aggressive Affinity / Burn / Zoo. So this just makes us very well positioned as is. Now let me just talk about very quickly about what we call the metagame. The term metagame was established for the pro chess tournaments, because what would happen is people would watch a certain playstyle, whatever would be the popular playstyle at the time, and then try to counter it with a different type of playstyle. And then what we call next leveling, or the metagame, is then someone would be, okay, I'm anticipating everyone at this tournament to be playing the strategy that beats the most common strategy. So I'm going to play the C deck, the C strategy to beat the B strategy that everyone's going to be playing to beat the A strategy, if that makes sense. So this rock, paper, scissors type strategy, the metagaming. And you have to do that in Modern when you pick a deck to go to a tournament. That's why I like Scred. Like, between Scred, Soul Sisters, and to an extent Living End, I think I have a lot of my bases covered. With if hyper-aggressive decks are... like hyper-aggressive decks that the Soul Sisters do not do well against, or certain combo decks that Soul Sisters do not do well against, I think Scred is very well positioned. And then if we are going up against, like, if Tron makes this huge comeback, like, Living End is very good against Tron, even if they run a lot of Relic of Progenitus. But right now I don't like Living End because of Eldrazi. And Eldrazi still seems to be one of the matchups that I think is pretty bad versus... Our Soul Sisters actually does decent versus certain Eldrazi decks, because Blight Herder is terrible versus Soul Sisters. But I don't know. It's just you have to really, like, try to pick the top 10 decks and then pick the one with the overall best win percentage versus those. Or just think that, okay, is Burn good against the top decks? Is Affinity, is all these decks that are really good matchups for Soul Sisters good against the top 10? Then you play Soul Sisters because you assume that everyone's going to play those type of decks. So anyway, I think that this is the list that I'm going to run for now. If Merfolk gets bigger, I'll bring in Wrath of Gods for the sideboard. But I think that this is an overall well-balanced list. The card that is the closest on the chopping block, I would say, is between Honor the Pure and Secure the Waste. And we'll just have to see if we... I just love Honor the Pure, Squadron Hawks, and Spectral Processions, though. Path is also a card I don't know if it needs to be main-boarded. We'll queue this up in a Modern 8-man. I'm going to be playing a ton of Modern 8-mans, or not 8-mans, leagues with Soul Sisters, just to try to get a feel for Soul Sisters and see how well it does in the metagame. I know that predominantly that's all I've really run on my channel. I mean, if you look at all the Soul Sisters decks, it is probably like 20% of Rogue Deck Builder. But it's kind of my go-to, my signature deck. I've had a lot of success with it. And a lot of people like the updates. I get so many messages about, what's your current list for Soul Sisters? And so I try to keep you updated on it. I hope you're not sick of it. We will, once we start getting Oath of Gatewatch cards, I have a ton of brews. I still need to do a top 10 Oath of Gatewatch video, which I'll be doing shortly here. Swim season is winding down. As soon as swim season is winding down, you will get a video series a day, whether it be for Gathering Magic or my second channel, which will be for Dice Masters, or my Commander segment that I'll be doing once per week. So you're going to get a video series almost once per day. I'm going to try to go really focused on the YouTube and building the brand for Rogue Deck Builder. So we're going to have a shop online pretty soon too, so that's exciting news. And a lot of things up and coming. Anyway, this is Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.